Hello, I'm Milosz Rawiński and you're watching TVP World Talks, where every word matters. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba paid a visit to his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in the city of Guangzhou in China. These talks may be important, according to both sides, when it comes to producing a lasting peace. However, before that, NATO has accused China of being a facilitator of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So, a facilitator of war or a facilitator of peace? What role is China going to play here? We'll be asking this and many more questions to our guest today, Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief at the Kyiv Post. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning again. Good to see you.
So let us begin with the issue that was raised by President Zelensky. President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed that China has all but committed itself not to send weapons to Russia. But do we have any degree of clarity whether something like that was truly said during the meeting and whether China really did promise not to arm the Russian Federation in this conflict?
No, we don't have any concrete evidence. We have the insinuations in a positive sense from Kuleba that things went as well as could be expected. But there's nothing really to suggest that there are details, firm commitments to this. I mean, China's been claiming from the very outset that it's basically neutral, that it's not taking sides, that it's not supplying weapons. It's turned a blind eye to North Korea supplying weapons. And of course, Kuleba did emphasize on his way out in Hong Kong that sanctions busting, the fact that Chinese companies seem to be providing the Russians with the materials and weapons, not only that they need, and helping Russia to evade Western-imposed sanctions.
Do you think it matters that the meeting took place in the city of Guangzhou? It's an important industrial city, but it is not Beijing. And some commentators suggested that this means that the level of the meeting, so to say, has not been quite as high as, say, the meetings between the leaders of Russia and China, even discounting the fact that these are foreign ministers talking to one another and not heads of state.
Well, I would say that from the Ukrainian point of view, the Ukrainians have every reason to be happy. There was the semblance of a high-level reception. If you look at the film, as we see on the screen, everything looks properly done, protocol observed at the highest level for foreign ministers. So no complaints there. Whether it takes place in the capital or elsewhere is not that important. It's who met who, and the handshakes against the background of the flags, obviously not something that the Kremlin is going to appreciate. It's embarrassing for the Kremlin because receiving the Ukrainian foreign minister in China is not exactly what Moscow would prefer to see. But remember also, let's place this in context, two things. There's the broader picture. Remember that since Kuleba met Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, Wang Yi has already met Lavrov on the fringes of the ASEAN foreign ministers meeting in Laos. So almost immediately, there's a kind of reassurance message sent to Moscow. Don't worry, it's all about appearances, posturing. We Chinese have to look good before the world. We have adopted the role of claiming to be neutral, and so it's good for our image. For Ukraine, it's good to be seen to be pressing the Chinese to become involved as an enabler of the peace search for peace settlement. By its actions, the Chinese are not acting as an enabler of peace. They are saying more or less good things. It's important that from the outset, they have emphasized support for territorial integrity, but they still keep pressing on the need for a ceasefire, which would mean 23% of Ukrainian territory remaining in Russian hands. How does that tie in with integrity, territorial integrity? How do you get the Russians to pull out? How do you get the Russians to pay for damages, immense damages to Ukraine, to loss of life, to respond to the charges of war crimes, etc., etc. So again, summarizing, I think that for both sides, Ukrainians and Chinese, this was an important meeting in the sense that it sent the kind of signal, the kind of message to the outside world that both capitals wanted to send.
So, what about the long term? Do you think China wants to be an enabler of peace in the end, enabler of negotiations at least, or an enabler of the ongoing conflict? Which way do you think the Chinese leadership is going to go, and what are their interests in this conflict?
Look, let's be realistic. This is not just about Ukraine. This is about East-West relations. This is about Taiwan. This is about Southeast Asia. There are conflicts there, not just Taiwan, in the Philippines area, etc. That ASEAN is meeting at this moment to discuss these things. I think what is critical here for the Chinese is to see what will happen now in the States. It was assumed, I think, by many, probably by Putin and the Chinese leadership, that at the end of the day, Trump would get in November, and there'd be a sigh of relief, and it would be far easier to do business with Trump for Beijing and for Moscow than with Biden. Now suddenly there's a game changer. Kamala Harris is running for president from the Democrats, a younger person who has nuances in her foreign policy approach, not with respect to Ukraine, but certainly as regards a tougher policy towards Israel, Gaza, etc. Something that both the Chinese and the Russians have also been pretty tough on, criticizing Israel, supporting the Palestinians as such, and the terrorist Hamas wing of the Palestinians. So I think that suddenly they are also in Beijing caught by surprise. They will want to see what messages will emerge in the next weeks from Harris, who she will pick as her deputy, what stance will that person take on geopolitics, military affairs, Ukraine, Taiwan, etc. If it's a former military person, there's reason for them to be sort of more cautious and prudent. If it's a newcomer to foreign policy, perhaps they can think that Harris will somehow be forced to adopt the language of concessions some way down the road. But I think that is the crucial thing, not about what actually happens on the battlefield in Ukraine. But they are also in Beijing aware that weapons are beginning to reach Ukraine in greater supplies. Planes are expected, more anti-missile defense systems are arriving. And Ukraine is managing to stand up despite the battering that its infrastructure, energetic infrastructure or energy infrastructure has had. And that also must alert China to the fact that it's not going to end very soon if we continue at this pace. Do we need this? Do we need this for business, for trade, for our image? And what kind of Russia is going to emerge from this? A weakened Russia? Yes, that's in Beijing's interest. But a weakened China in terms of its international role and clout? Chinese don't want that.
So what ideas do the Chinese have for a peace plan? During the peace conference in Switzerland, which China decided to skip, it has published its own very general plan for achieving peace, the so-called six-point plan. This was made in conjunction with the administration of Brazil. However, this plan, like I mentioned, is fairly general. I mean, the only specific thing is about avoiding nuclear escalation and absolutely avoiding any attacks against nuclear power plants. So this seems specifically addressed at Moscow because, well, at nobody else has the nuclear button there. Nobody else is capable of attacking nuclear facilities. But when looking at the rest of the plan, very vague. So what do you think are going to be the specifics? Is it more likely to be similar to Trump's idea for ending the war or something else entirely?
I think the Chinese have been sitting it out, implicitly helping Russia and supporting it politically with its veto, with its political clout in the Security Council and elsewhere at various international fora, not showing up in Switzerland, as you've mentioned, to the Ukraine-initiated peace forum, etc. So I think that the expectation was that the war of attrition that has been going on will wear out the West. there'll be Ukraine fatigue. The Ukrainians won't manage to sustain the effort, not only in terms of having the military equipment, but probably having problems with morale, with conscription issues, etc., etc. So up to this point, I think they felt that they could sit it out and things would take their course, probably resulting in some kind of Ukrainian concessions, territorial concessions. However, as I say, things are changing. There's better news from the battlefield. Weapons are arriving, and there's this huge change in America, the uncertainty with Harris's candidature. Plus, remember, Europe is getting its act together. And perhaps even today, as we see the opening session of the Olympic Games, perhaps Europe will also remember that it needs to stand together and it has to be proud of its not just the Games, but its international standing, its economic role, but it's also its moral, political role as also a factor for peace and democracy in the world.
So still, as you're saying, there are so many moving parts and so many things are in flux. For China, perhaps, it is actually the best option to continue waiting, looking at the situation, and remaining fairly enigmatic until the very end. Bohdan Nahaylo was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
And I'm Nasz Rawiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.